everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold, and you're not. And this is a three-part series lecture on your favorite player, Yasser Seirawan. I want to thank our sponsor, Patrick Wheeler, for sponsoring this three-part series. Today we're going to focus on Yasser's attacking and tactics games, where he didn't win 80 moves in positional endgame style, which will probably be the next lecture. This is just games where he went for his opponent and beat them with tactics and or checkmate and or both, which is not his usual MO, but he can do anything he wants. Yasser was born in Syria, and I've been friends with Yasser for 35 years. So we could just spend the time me talking about Yasser and not showing you any chess games, but probably that wouldn't make a good YouTube video. Anyway, one of the worst things that ever happened to Yasser was he was born in Syria. And the reason it's bad is Yasser travels a lot. He travels internationally a lot. And on his passport, it says born in Syria. So for a lot of countries, they take him into the back and talk to him about it. Why were you in Syria? What did you do in Syria? How did you get out of Syria? And he said, I left Syria when I was a baby. I wasn't even a year old. And they're like, we have more questions for you. So he told me he just gets questioned everywhere. He gets randomly selected. He was world junior champion in 1979, and he's written many books. And currently, he just got a new job. About 2 months ago, he was named the St. Louis Chess Club, commentator or something, or head of something. So he's permanently in St. Louis now. He just recently moved to St. Louis because he's basically at the chess club every day, either doing commentary or in meetings discussing commentary and I guess who to commentate with and so forth. Probably 200 days a year at least, you can see Yasser on the St. Louis Chess Club YouTube or Twitch, and he'll be commentating about something that's going on there. And then they moved to England when he was a baby, and then when he was 7, they moved to Seattle, Washington, and that's where he grew up, in Seattle. And he told me a funny story. He was watching The Tonight Show with, I think it was, maybe it wasn't The Tonight Show. I think it was Dick Cavett, although it could have been Johnny Carson with The Tonight Show. I'll never remember the details, which is good because Yasser never remembers the details either. So that makes it better. But anyway, and they said, welcome to the world chess champion, Bobby Fischer. Yay! And Bobby Fischer was on the show. And Seirawan said, how can he be world champion? He never beat me. So, and he was a little kid. He thought, he was better than everybody because he was better than everybody he played up until that point. He hadn't played in tournaments against strong players. So, and so forth. He was world junior champion at the age of 19 in 1979. Currently, he's 63 years old, so he has a serious case of old. So he doesn't play in tournaments anymore. He barely even plays exhibitions. He really doesn't play. He'll play at Bug House at the St. Louis Club with other super GMs, but that's about it. Seirawan was known for being the best American player for quite a long time in the 80s and 90s, and also known for being Korchnой's second. He was one of Korchnoj's coaches for at least 10 years, maybe more than 10 years. And he played Victor a lot and learned a lot from him and vice versa. Let's see. Yeah, I was there. Let's see, this is wrong. What that says is wrong. It says an 88 to 90 tournament in St. John. What? Man, whoever wrote that needs to sharpen up on their writing skills. So in February of 88, he played a candidates match. It wasn't a knockout tournament. They're referring to candidates matches as a knockout tournament. Well, that's not what it was. And he lost to Spielman in the first round of the candidates matches. And it was in 1988. Was it, what? I mean, I know what they're saying, but they didn't write it very well, etc. Also of note, if you're not old enough to remember, which is probably at least half of you, and if you're watching on YouTube, probably 80% of you are not old enough to remember this. But Yasser used to have a chess magazine called Inside Chess. And it was a pretty good magazine. It had tournament results and game analysis by him and his friends, Grandmaster IM friends. The magazine was sold to the chesscafe.com website, in which old articles were featured. Yeah, they're going to be old. Yeah. I've seen some of the old magazines. We have some at our chess club, but I remember when they came out new. That was a long time ago. Okay, and then they talk about a lot of other stuff. Seirawan has been somewhat instrumental in trying to get the super GMs to not unionize, but to get like a clear message of what should be done within the World Championship cycle and with FIDE, and try to get people together, which he hasn't been doing lately because he did that when he was in his 40s and 50s, and okay, he's probably had enough of them by now. I was coaching Yasser in 2011 at the World Team Championship in Ningbo, China. He didn't have a computer that would run ChessBase. He had like Windows 95 or something. And this was in 2011. So he didn't have any engines on his computer or ChessBase. So we used my computer, and he would use a chessboard, and we would talk about stuff, and he would argue with the computer and so forth. In that tournament, he beat Judith Polgar and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, even though he was already in his 50s and basically retiring and so forth. Okay, and then he's written all these books. They were Microsoft books, then the publishing rights were sold to Everyman Chess, and they're very highly rated books. It's called Winning This and Winning That. So remember to win, that's the important part. And he also wrote some other books. He wrote a book on Kasparov-Karpov. He wrote a book on the Fischer-Spassky 1992 match. And one thing it won't tell you in the Wikipedia article is he wrote that book and he had the papers and then they were lost. So he actually wrote a book and lost the papers. I don't know if they were stolen or lost his luggage, but he had to write the book again. So that was the second writing of his book. He just had to remember what he said before and so forth. He was at the Fischer-Spassky match in 1992 when Fischer briefly came back. Okay, they talk about openings. This first opening, the Seirawan attack, which nobody ever plays, I played that against Irene Sukandar, and I won one of my nicest games because I knew all the theory because I was like, nobody knows this opening. Okay, and then he has a line against the King's Indian, which I still haven't played. But it's not named after him, but he plays it a lot. Okay, let's get to chess, if I can figure out how, which I'm not saying I can. Okay. So now you can all see the chessboard, otherwise I'm in trouble. Okay, this is a game played in 1990 between Yasser and Jan Timman. And remember, the theme of this lecture is not just Seirawan, but games where he was attacking his opponent's king or forking and skewering pieces and playing for tricks. Sort of exciting Seirawan games. They don't necessarily go together, exciting Seirawan games, but they do for this lecture. He's more known for outplaying his opponent, and he's like slightly better, then clearly better, and then winning. And then he wins in 50 moves, and you never had a chance. And when Yasser wrote Inside Chess Magazine, he had a very interesting article about the 4 kinds of chess players. You know, like positional, tactical. And the 4th kind was the builder. He said that's the best. The one who builds, gets different advantages, and eventually has a winning position out of nowhere, sort of like you would expect with Magnus or Karpov. Although Magnus wasn't born when the magazine was out, so you wouldn't expect it from him then. Okay, and he thought of himself as a builder, not as like a swashbuckling, attacking, crazy, kind of player, like some of the players we've had recently in my lectures. Okay, So Yasser and Timman worked together for matches, and they've played matches with each other, and they've played in tournaments. I would say in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, Timman must have been one of his 3 or 4 most common opponents. He must have played Timman like 40, 50 times. Okay, so they played a Queen's Indian, which they both play. And in the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of super GMs played the Queen's Indian. It's not very popular now. Now most super GMs will play D5 here. They're not playing the Queen's Indian as much anymore. Okay, Yasser played knight c3, bishop b4. So it's sort of a Nimzo Indian, Queen's Indian. And Yasser played the unusual move, queen b3. Typically, white could play queen c2 or bishop g5 or e3. Queen b3 is not very common. Black played c5, defending his bishop. He saw it. a3 attacking the bishop. Timman played bishop a5, maintaining the pin. White can't play b4 because it's illegal. Otherwise, b4 is pretty good. Okay. And then bishop g5, pinning the knight. Knight c6 attacks the pawn on d4. And Yasser castled because his pieces are all gone, so he can castle that way. If he wanted to castle kingside, that would take a while. Okay, castles is a very aggressive move that you typically wouldn't see from Yasser, but there's 2 kinds of aggressive moves. Aggressive moves in the middle game and end game, and you're hoping that they're good, and aggressive moves in the opening, and you already prepared them. So I think he already knew this move and this position, and this was his preparation. Okay, bishop takes c3. Now that the king isn't on e1 anymore, this knight's not pinned, so white could play like knight b5 to d6, and maybe this bishop would get trapped later. So he took that knight, and then d5. So if you're playing a blitz game, you just play queen takes without thinking. Okay, but I'm guessing in that instance, black could play knight e4, and then if we take the queen, and I take your queen, your rook is attacked, and now I could take either way with the king or the knight. And then this pawn structure is no good for white. So I'm guessing d5 is still his prep. Well, white's threatening taking the knight, which just wins, because there's a pin on the d file. Okay, so he takes d5, c takes d5, bishop e5, letting him take the knight, and then queen e7, breaking the pin on the d pawn. And, well, black basically thinks he solved all of his problems. Black's going to castle next move, material is equal, and white's kingside, stop that. White's kingside is very suspicious. Okay, and Yasser took, and even though this was 1990 and my rules didn't exist yet, somehow Yasser still knew them. That's pretty good. It's good to know my rules without me saying them yet. So he played e3 to get his bishop out, and black played rook d8. And in this position, black has a problem. Okay, if black castles, then white plays very simple, rook takes d7. If knight takes d7, then you lose your queen. And if queen takes d7, you lose your bishop. Okay, but Timman saw that, so he played rook d8, and now he's ready to castle. Okay, and I think Yasser knows his polymorphy. And the reason is, you didn't know, I didn't tell you this, it wasn't in the Wikipedia article, because Yasser doesn't want anybody to know. But I give you the dirt. Yasser actually went to middle school with polymorphy. Yeah, that's how old he is. So they actually discussed the famous opera game together, and Yasser played rook takes d7, just like Morphy did in the opera game. Okay, now king takes looks a little suspicious. That doesn't look good. And queen takes loses the bishop on e5. And knight takes loses the queen. So Timman played the most natural move, rook takes. Okay, rook takes is good. Then Yasser played bishop b5, and once again, we can't castle for the same reason we couldn't castle before. And now if you can't take with the knight because it's pinned. If you take this way, you're down a piece. So he still can't castle. So he played bishop d6. Now, white can't play knight takes bishop because it's not on e5 anymore. So now, if it was black's turn, he could castle. Okay, so white's down the exchange, but his bishops are pinning everything, just like Morphy. Okay, he played rook d1, just like Morphy did. Morphy played rook d7 and rook d1. And he finally castled. Bishop takes. You can't take with the knight. The knight is still pinned, so you have to play queen takes. Then bishop f4. Typically, you would just think like mess up the guy's pawns, but if you mess up the guy's pawns, now the rook can go to d8 next move, and your knight, you can't get your knight here to attack the bishop. It's too slow. So he played bishop f4, that attacks the bishop, and usually retreating moves aren't moves that are so aggressive, except when they are. Then retreating moves are good. Okay, speaking of retreating, he played c4 because c4 is explosive. He's like, hey, why don't you take my pawn so I can pin your queen to your king? And he actually said that. And Yasser said, shh, no talking during the game. So Yasser moved his queen to c2. So now he has to play knight e8. He has to unpin. He has to defend his bishop. Knight g5, threatening queen takes h7 mate with advantage, and threatening knight e4 also with advantage. Okay, knight e4 wins the bishop, queen h7 is mate. And Timman, being the world-class player that he is, in fact, I did a lecture about him last week, he played the move f5, stopping knight e4 and stopping queen h7 mate. Pretty good defense. Queen takes c4 check. There's no rook c8 because the knight is on e8 and because it's check. That's two reasons. King h8, bishop takes, knight takes. And now he doesn't play any tricks with knight f7 or rook takes or any of that stuff. He plays queen d5. He says, I don't need tricks to win. I just pin your knight and win it. So we see rook d8, knight e6. Now, if you blunder, because you like blundering, if you check and you're like, haha, knight takes, queen takes, I win, which is correct. And then if your opponent plays queen takes, you might think the knight is pinned, but it's not because it defends the rook. So that would be a blunder knight f7 check. So he played knight e6, attacking the rook, queen c8 check, king b1, always play king b1, rook to d7, and now Yasser finished the game very nicely. He took the knight. Oh, give me the knight. Rook, and then Timman resigned. If Timman takes the queen, rook takes, there's no defense to rook d8 check. You can make any move you want, and I'm going to pre-move rook d8 check. And then I win. Hooray for me. And then if you played this, my pre-move would be taken back, and then I take your queen. So he actually resigned in this position, so it was a nice tactic to finish the game. So he kept pinning things on d7. He pinned different pieces. He sacrificed the exchange. They castled opposite sides. And this isn't a typical Yasser victory, okay, where he's castling opposite sides, sacrificing material, playing brilliant tactics. But if that's the way to win, that's the way you have to win. That was the way he was allowed to win. Black has to go back to the drawing board in that opening. Luckily, both players are retired, so he doesn't really have to. But yeah, he could. Timman's the same age as Karpov, so he must be 72? Something like that. And Yasser 63. So in this game, this was played 33 years ago, so they were not as old. Okay, next game, if you thought Timman wasn't good enough for the lecture, and you're like, Timman, I could beat Timman, show me somebody good. Okay, so here's the game. Seirawan beat Karpov. And Seirawan's beaten Karpov more than once. And they transpose to a queen's gambit. Okay, and this is what Karpov played for many years, with both sides sometimes too. Bishop h4. I always play bishop takes f6, which I recommend in my Chessable article, Chessable course. But I used to play bishop h4. That's what I played because there were a lot of Karpov-Korchnoi games from the 70s and 80s with bishop h4. So I used to play bishop h4. Castles, rook c1. I've never played rook c1. I've always played e3. Okay, rook c1, b6. Then they did some trading, always trade. And Yasser said, well, I didn't play e3, so I don't have to play e3. In fact, I'd rather not. And he played g3. So he's going to fianchetto his bishop instead of playing e3 like bishop e2, bishop d3, not as aggressive. Rook e8, and he played rook c3. He's worried if he plays bishop g2, Karpov will play bishop a6. That's already a nasty threat. So Karpov nips that in the, Seirawan nips that in the bud and plays rook c3. Now he can always play rook e3, doesn't have to worry about that. Knight a6, queen a4, and now Karpov played very un-Karpov-like. I think it was his prep, but he didn't do his prep too well. He played c5, rook e3, and now you're skewered because, he played rook c3. And Karpov saw this, and he thought he could sacrifice a piece and punish Yasser's king. Yasser's famous for taking things that are free and having his king run around. If Yasser doesn't see the mate, and he calculates, says, my king's fine. Well, you can't move your queen because you lose your rook on e8. So Karpov has to play bishop e6, and Yasser takes the knight. So white's up a knight, but now it's time for black to attack. C takes d4. So now, if you play the obvious knight takes d4, I play queen b4 check, attacking your king and your knight. So that doesn't win a piece. So he moved his rook b3, which prevents queen b4 check. Bishop f5. He wants to play d3, and he's going to attack on the e file and the c file. Bishop g2, bishop c2, attacking the rook. And Yasser says, yeah, you can win the exchange. I've already won a piece. And Yasser also said, the first game against Timman, I sacked the exchange, so why can't I sack the exchange this game? So he played knight takes d4 and said, yeah, take my rook, good for you. Okay, so now white has a bishop and a knight for a rook, which is a winning material advantage, and black doesn't have enough attack. Karpov continued rook c8. Yasser played bishop f3. If Yasser castles, Karpov will play queen takes e2, winning a pawn and attacking this pawn and breaking through on the 7th rank in the e file. So he just said, well, I'll just play bishop f3 and I'll castle next move. Rook c2, he castled. Rook takes b2, rook d1. And if you're a numbers cruncher, you could argue, and you'd almost always be wrong, but you could, that it's a rook and a pawn for a bishop and a knight, and that's about equal. Well, there's different kinds of equal. Here, the d pawn is weak, a pawn is weak, my knight has this nice d4 square, this pawn's probably going to fall. So white's just winning here. The two pieces just beat the rook, the extra pawn is irrelevant. Played rook d8, Yasser played knight d4, rook d7, knight c6. Yasser likes to take pawns. So he said, hey, there's a pawn I can take. Yummy, yummy, yummy. I wonder if he said yummy, yummy, yummy. So he takes this pawn, very unusual, because it looks like the knight's trapped and it's pinned to the queen and such. He played rook c7. If black plays the move queen to a8, I assume Yasser would play queen b6, queen c8 check. I could be wrong. Maybe he'd play queen a3. Actually, I think he'd play queen a3. Yeah, I think queen a3 is better. Queen c8 check is good, but I think queen a3 is better. Then the rook is almost trapped. It has to go here. And then I guess I play queen here, forking the rooks. Well, then he has rook c, c7. So I guess I could play either queen b3 or knight b5. I like queen b3, and then I'll play knight b5 next move. Okay, I like that. Okay, so Karpov didn't play queen a8. He played rook c7. I guess he wants to double rooks on the 7th rank. a4, Yasser saves his pawn. Queen a8. And now Yasser plays the shocking move. Rook takes d5. Amazing. So Yasser was up a piece. Then Yasser sacrificed the exchange. Now Yasser sacking a piece. Rook takes d5. Amazing. Okay, and Karpov said, thank you very much. And he took. If he plays the move rook takes, then I play queen d3, and this is just like the Timman game. I'm going to pre-move rook d8 check. How did that happen? It's the same tactic. It's mate and it wins the queen. So he took with the queen, rook d8 check, queen d3 check. Now, if Karpov plays g6, queen d4 is annoying because it's hard to stop queen h8 mate and rook h8 mate, so forth. So he played f5, just like Timman did. Queen takes f5, g6, queen e6. That threatens queen g8 mate, and which you can stop, but if you do, I'll play queen e8 and queen h8 mate. So here Karpov resigned. You see, Karpov sacked a piece for an attack, then Yasser sacked the exchange and then a piece, and now he has the mating attack. And his king is very safe on g2. That's the safest king ever. Karpov's king is not safe. Karpov has two moves in this position that make sense. Rook f7 and rook g7. They both stop queen g8 mate. Then I play queen e8, and then I'm out of ideas. I have no ideas for black. If you play g5, bishop e4 check. And if you don't play g5, I play queen h8 mate. Play here, I play queen g8 mate. So after queen e6, Karpov resigned. Yasser really turned that game around. He went from defending up material to attacking down material. Although I would argue white's not down material here. He has a bishop and 2 pawns for a rook. Okay, so brilliant win against the reigning world champion. Like most Americans, this is a joke by the way, an American player beat both reigning world champions Karpov and Kasparov. At that time, that was unheard of. Okay, now Carlsen's the world champion now, right? Let's see, Caruana's beaten Carlsen, I think. And they had 12 draws in their match. And Hikaru beat Carlsen once. Okay, now who was world champion before Carlsen? I guess there was no world champion. I guess it was Anand, because he beat Anand, then he kept beating everybody. So Nakamura and Caruana have both beaten Anand and Carlsen. Sort of like the Kasparov and Karpov of their generation. Okay, let's go to the next game. I do not want to save. Okay, let me see, let me have a look here. Okay, this is, I think, Yasser's most brutal game, where he plays very un-Yasser-like. This is the game Yasser Seirawan against Ivanchuk. Okay, Ivanchuk's a tough customer. Ivanchuk's a tough customer now, but he's actually older than me. Ivanchuk played the King's Indian, and Yasser must have saw that Wikipedia article where it says Yasser plays this against the King's Indian, because that's what he did. So this is what Yasser does against the King's Indian. He plays bishop d3 and knight e2. Okay, very unusual line, but he plays it a lot. d5, a5 stopping b4, and knight e2. So typically, white's knight is on f3 and white's bishop is on e2. But Yasser likes this structure more. I guess he wants to be able to move his f-pawn. Knight a6, f3. Now it's the same-ish King's Indian, probably by transposition. Knight d7, bishop e3. Yasser loves the space advantage. See, when I have a space advantage, I'm like, now what do I do? Yasser doesn't care about that. He just wants to have more space. When Yasser has a pawn on d5, he's very happy. Bishop h6, blundering his bishop. How could Ivanchuk be so blunderful? And the idea obviously is, if Yasser takes the bishop, we have queen h4 check, getting the bishop back. And the way the pawns are situated in the center, Ivanchuk thought this was his bad bishop, and this will be the bishop that has a lot of squares. And that Yasser's bishop is trapped behind the pawns, so let's trade the dark squared bishops. Yasser played queen d2, and they did trade c6. So white has a lead in development. White has 4 pieces out, and black has 2 pieces out. And black's opening up the position. Okay, don't do that. Although if you do it, and you're playing the right player, your game may be featured on the best games of your opponent. So maybe you should do it. Okay, so c6, opening up the center. Queen h6, stopping Ivanchuk from castling. Knight c5, attacking the bishop. Yasser plays rook d1. I guess he wants to castle king side instead of queen side. And with c6 happening, it looks like this file is going to open up. Queen b6, Ivanchuk attacks the b pawn. Bishop b1, he says, take my b pawn if you dare. And he plays king e7. He's afraid Yasser is going to take on c6 and play rook takes d6. He doesn't want to play queen c7. He just played queen b6. So he played king e7. He's like, I'm a king safe there. f4, Yasser said, no, your king's not safe there. And Ivanchuk said, well, normally I would say no talking, but you're right. So e takes f4, rook f1. He can't castle because Ivanchuk lined up his queen there. But Yasser said, if your king can be on e7, mine can be on e1, because I have more pieces attacking. These pieces aren't doing anything to defend the black king. Rook f8, defending the f pawn in case of queen takes f4. Queen takes f4. He pre-defended f7. f6, never play f6. D takes c6. Now I'm threatening queen takes d6 check. If you take with a pawn, I play queen d6 check. If you take with the queen, I have knight d5 check, or knight d4 attacking your queen. So that's not a good choice. So he took with the queen, knight d4 attacks the queen, knight d5 attacks the king, and black is finished here. Black has no good move. He played king d8. If he plays king d7, this just wins a whole rook. Just a free rook. King f7 looks worse. Check, knight e7 check. And Ivanchuk was your favorite player before this game. Okay, so he played king d8, queen takes d6 check. You can't play queen d7 because your rook's hanging then. So he played bishop d7, completing development. And Yasser played knight b5. Remember, the bishop is defending the e4 pawn, so there's no queen takes e4 check. Now in this position, after knight b5, white is threatening, we'll make a silly move for black, h5. We're threatening queen b6 check, and then knight d6 check, and then I can take your queen. And probably I have a mate that I don't see. So instead of playing h5, which I was just kidding about, Ivanchuk resigned because his king is getting crushed, his position's terrible, and he's down material. So he decided to resign. Good job. Good idea to resign. I agree wholeheartedly. And so forth. So that was a crushing victory that Yasser had against Ivanchuk. And again, not really in Yasser's style. Keeping his king on e1, attacking with everything, busting through the center, and winning a very quick game. Ivanchuk didn't last very long that game. Okay, last but not least, Yasser also wins with black. And Yasser's favorite opening with black over the years has been the Caro-Kann. And this is against Vlastimil Hort. And he played the Caro-Kann. E5 is the most testing. And Yasser has had this variation a lot because back in the 80s and 90s, people played knight c3 and then g4. This was the most popular way to play for white 30, 40 years ago. And then knight e2, and white wants to play knight f4, and white wants to play h4, h5, and so forth. c5, busting open the center. h4, trying to trap the bishop. cd4, attacking the knight. Knight d4. h5, saving his bishop. Bishop b5 check. You have to play knight d7. Bishop g5. So Hort's getting all aggressive and crazy, pushing his pawns everywhere, attacking every move. But Yasser has a very solid structure. His pawn structure is solid. And once you play h4 and g4, it's hard for me to recommend that white should castle kingside because he pushed all his kingside pawns. White's king isn't safe there. Typically, white castles queenside in this variation. And what's funny is white castled queenside by hand, which you very rarely see. So bishop e7 was played. f4. Man, that's pretty aggressive. hg, queen takes g4. Bishop takes g5. You can't take with the h pawn because it's pinned. So he took with the f pawn. You can't take this pawn because your knight's pinned. Bishop h5, stopping white from castling queenside. And probably white doesn't want to castle kingside. So he played king to d2. He castled by hand. And then after rook c8, he played rook e1. And then he'll play king c1. And just like he castled and played rook e1. Queen b6, attacking the knight on d4. Knight b3. And in this position, if black plays rook takes c3 with the idea of taking the bishop, white plays the Zwischenzug, bishop takes g7 check, and then takes the rook. So that doesn't work. So he played a6, kicking the bishop. He took, king takes. Now the kings have opposition. King d2, king d7. Very suspicious. Okay, but why did white push all his kingside pawns? How'd that help him? Okay, king c1. So if anybody's king is loose, it's actually probably white's, because black has this open file here. Black's bishop is controlling this. My knight has the beautiful f5 square, and I can play a5, a4, and so forth. So he played rook c4. He wants to double up on the bubble up. Knight d2 attacking the rook. Rook b4 attacking the b pawn. And lucky for us, well, lucky for you, I've already seen the game. Luckily for you, Hort did not defend his b2 pawn. He said, you want to play rook takes b2, be my guest. So he said a3. He said, I dare you to take my b pawn. I double dare you. And Yasser said, okay. And then Hort played knight a4 and said, I forked your queen and rook. Obviously, Yasser saw knight a4 and decided his attack was too strong, but he has to sacrifice a whole rook. And Hort probably thought, well, if he sacrifices a rook, I'm up a rook. And he did. Rook takes c2 check. King takes. Rook c8 check. Now, what should white do? King d3 looks insane, so he didn't do that. I guess queen b5 check just wins. I'm at least winning the knight if I'm not winning more. Then I'm winning material anyway. So he played knight c3. That seems very sane. d4, threatening rook takes knight check. Rook b1. So now if you take this knight with check, I take, and your queen is also hanging on b6. So he played queen c6. Rook b3. Now he attacked the knight again. Knight d5. So black's down a rook, but white's king is just hopeless. White's going to lose a knight, so black's only down the exchange. Yasser always sacks the exchange, I guess. And white's king is just totally open. Black's king can hide whenever it wants. Knight b1, defending his knight again. Bishop G4. If you take the bishop, I have this fork, which isn't not just a fork, it also is a discovered attack on the rook. That's more tactics than I can even count. So obviously he didn't take that. He moved his queen. He took the knight on c3, king c1. Black's going to play bishop f5 check anyway, so he put his king on a dark square. a5 with the idea of a4, and the white rook is trapped. That's a funny trapped rook. So he played rook f1, threatening rook f7 check. Bishop f5. White played a4, stopping a4. c2. And you can see black's king is hopelessly placed. Oh, white's king is. I almost know which one's white and which is black. Queen takes a4, threatening the rook. It doesn't matter what he does. He took with check. King c6. See, if I was black in a blitz game, I would be playing king e8 all day. Get my king safe. But Yasser's thinking tactically. He's like, I'm attacking the rook, and I'm attacking the knight with check, which is going to be a checkmate. That just attacks more of white's pieces. White's pieces are not coordinated very well. They're just like somebody threw the pieces on the board and said that's where they are. And after king c6, now the internet says he played rook takes f5 and resigned. That move is so nonsensical that I'll just say I don't believe it. I'll just say he resigned. Because rook takes f5 and then resigning doesn't make any sense. After rook f5, I mean, I can take the rook and win, or I can take this knight with check and win, and then take this rook or this rook. So I have a hard time believing he played rook f5 and then resigned. I think he just resigned. That's less embarrassing for white, so let's just say that happened. Okay, and that game was played in 1981. Yeah, Hort was still good in 1981. Hort was one of the top 10 players in the world in the 70s. Probably not in 81, but close. And Yasser was around his peak, during the 80s. I would say the whole 80s was Yasser's peak. He was world junior champion in 79. Okay, so that's some Yasser attacking wins. I want to thank our sponsor, Patrick Wheeler. And the next two lectures will also be about Yasser. There'll be different sides to it, though. There'll be some long endgame wins, positional grinds, or other stuff that's special. And we won't spend so much time in the next two lectures talking about Yasser in general. I'll tell you some personal stories, probably ones he doesn't want me to tell you. I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold. If you want to sponsor a lecture, contact Karen at atlchessclub.com. We got about the next 2 months filled up of sponsored lectures, but just get in there and we'll sponsor your lecture too. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.